We just don't do floorboards anymore like we used to. It's a real shame. It's a real shame.
Welcome to Keep It Fictional, a weekly podcast for book lovers by book lovers. Build your to-be-read list with Sadie, Liz, Virginia, Fiona, and Corrine from the Port Moody Public Library. Warning, this podcast contains strong opinions and may cause an increase in your library holds list.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Keep It Fictional podcast from the Port Moody Public Library. I am here today with my book friends, and I am so excited to talk about books today. Now, pair of glasses can sometimes mean a superhero versus not a superhero. As many of you know, in the situation with Clark Kent, he puts them on, he's Clark Kent. He takes them off, he is Superman. And that is all that it takes. So we are trying out today to see if by removing or putting on our glasses, we in fact become superheroes. Do we get superpowers just with the removal of our glasses? Has anybody experienced that yet by just removing their glasses today?
The fun superpower of not being able to see.
Super fuzzy vision.
Corrine, have you found that all of your other senses have been heightened now that you can no longer see to a point of superpowers?
Well, I am hungry.
Okay. So maybe. Well, as you can tell from our introduction today, we are going to be talking about books about superheroes. And not just superheroes, but characters who have superhuman powers. So this could be an actual superhero, as you see in Marvel or DC. This might be somebody who has a magical power. So we're going to see what our book friends are going to bring to us today. This topic is something that I absolutely love. I read many, many books about people who have magical powers, so it is near and dear to my heart. So I'm very excited to see what all of my book friends have brought today, and maybe I will add some to my reading list from what they have. So we're going to start today off with Mark. Now, Mark, what superhero and or superhero adjacent book have you brought for us today?
Thank you, Sadie. So the book I'll be talking about today is Wildseed by Octavia Butler. So a little bit about Octavia Butler. Like from a very young age, was interested in being a writer. And when she went to college, it definitely was something that she was studying towards becoming. And when she was in university and college, she very much became more politically involved with things like the Black Panthers, the Black Power movement. As a Black woman, this was something that resonated very strongly with her. And in her work, you can definitely see these kinds of issues that were raised in the 60s and 70s by these movement groups as being present in her novels. Issues of like race, class, and gender play a very central role in her books. So, for example, in her 1998 book, The Parable of Talents, depicts the revival of a fundamentalist Christian America with a president whose actual motto was "Make America Great Again." So she's definitely tapped into a lot of like things that are going on in America and the world in her novels. And that's definitely very much present in this book. But one of the things that makes her very unique is that she also writes in the genre of science fiction. So she definitely brings these into a genre that at the time when she started writing was still very much dominated by white male authors. And she sort of brought like a much needed alternative look at what the future and different possibilities could look like to bring a different voice to the genre at a time when not entirely male, but definitely much more so than it is today. Was not the most diverse genre by any stretch. She was also a very decorated writer. She was the first science fiction writer to be named a MacArthur Genius. She also won the Nebula and Hugo Awards for various novels of hers. But it was only in the last 4 or 5 years or so, actually, since her death, that her books have become bestsellers. So it's definitely sort of showing that there's like a very long tail to her work that's still resonating today. And I think it's largely because, as I mentioned, the issues of like race, class, and gender that are very prevalent in her works that people are definitely becoming more aware of, trying to think about more, as well as to show more diversity within these kinds of genres like science fiction. So she's definitely one of the very important writer within this genre. And this particular book, Wildseed, is actually the 4th book in her Patternist series in terms of the order that they were written in. But in terms of the chronological date of the timeline that this world takes place in, it's actually the 1st book. So it doesn't require any prior knowledge of the series, even though it's the 4th one written in it. It was my first introduction to the series, and I didn't have any issues reading it because it doesn't assume any prior knowledge of what happens later on. It's very much an introduction to this particular world. The novel incorporates a lot of accurate historical cultural and linguistic elements as it takes place in the 17th and 18th century in West Africa and the east coast of America. So Butler did a lot of research to make sure there's accuracy to the way the culture and the world was depicted, both these kind of science fiction elements that I'll talk about in just a second. So the story begins in 1690 with a man named Doro. And Doro is the head of a series of villages off the western coast of Africa, an English-controlled portion of America, a village called Wheatley. Doro has just learned that his village has been raided by slave traders from England, and he experiences like a feeling of loss and rage at what has just happened to his people. And along the way, as he sort of tries to head towards the English slave encampment, he encounters a woman named Anyanwu. At first, we don't really quite know what's going on with these two characters, but they sort of sense each other and sort of like drawn to each other, kind of like they have like extrasensory kind of perception of the other being there, and they're sort of drawn towards each other. When they sort of encounter each other for the first time, they sort of know that they each have like a sort of hidden power. They can kind of sense it on each other, but they don't quite know why or what's going on with the two of them. So they agree to demonstrate their powers to each other so they can learn more about who the other is. And Anyanwu first demonstrates to Doro her powers by rubbing her hands carefully over her body. Her skin begins to move like clay and it's sort of becomes like a malleable kind of substance. And her appearance begins to change, eventually transforming her appearance into that of a man. So Anyanwu is actually a shapeshifter of sorts. She can take on the appearance of any human, regardless of race, gender, or other characteristics. She can even transform into an animal and converse with them in animal communication systems. So, for example, in the book, we see her transform into different animals like a leopard and a dolphin. She can also change the color of her skin from black to that of any other human she chooses, but she chooses to maintain her appearance as a Black woman in her everyday life, in spite of the challenges this presents to her. As I mentioned, this is the time where slavery is just starting to become a thing. She could easily try and blend in as a white person to try and evade these kinds of practices, but she chooses to maintain her appearance as she sort of wants to be her natural self in that kind of way. But she has this special power that she continues to get around certain things. And Anyanwu is actually hundreds of years old. Just how old we don't quite know, but it's clear that she's able to live so long that she doesn't seem to be capable of dying through natural causes. She has this special genes or something that we don't quite know that allows her to live for many, many, many years. After explaining and demonstrating her powers to Doro, Doro initially does not reciprocate in showing his powers, but instead takes Anyanwu to the lands of a rival whom he is in dispute with. Upon their arrival, Doro fights and kills the man he came to meet, and through a process that might be best described as body snatching, he transfers his consciousness into the body of the dead man, reanimated once again as though he had not died. So Doro, it seems, is able to continue his life indefinitely, so long as he finds a fresh body to inhabit that is not infirm or dying of natural causes. So Doro also has this special ability that allows him to live for many, many, many generations, perhaps even indefinitely, so long as he's able to find a body that he can inhabit and is not killed himself. So essentially, he can sort of move from body to body through his special abilities. So in that way, our two protagonists are able to take on potentially innumerable appearances and represent two different possibilities or directions of human capabilities that are sort of explored throughout this series. Because the pattern of this series very much is about these kinds of superhumans that have started to emerge out of seemingly nowhere. They represent different possibilities for human evolution, human change, and human abilities. As Anyanwu represents an ability to heal, mend, transform, and slow the effects of aging and illness, whereas Doro is much more a sort of powerful, mighty, warrior kind of person who is able to take life rather than give it, as he sort of takes a much more patriarchal kind of authority, power stance within the series, whereas Anyanwu is much more like a caring, nurturing, sort of moralistic figure. So they kind of have these two sides of the same coin in a certain way, where they are opposites of one another in these different ways. And essentially, Doro is interested in Anyanwu, and he sort of invites her to join him in his village in America. Doro, as I mentioned, he's sort of leading these different villages in different areas of the world. And Doro has a sort of goal to bring together these different people into his settlements in order to try and bring about a change in human evolution. He sort of believes in the ability to direct the future changes in human abilities and human life by bringing together these kinds of people. Anyanwu is very much disgusted by this idea. She's very much against it, but Doro makes a deal with her because recently Anyanwu's village had also been raided by slave traders, and Doro agrees to free them if Anyanwu agrees to come with him to America with her. So they kind of make this deal with each other to go along with each other as long as it's mutually beneficial to the two of them in different ways. Throughout this book, we also encounter other individuals with special abilities, such as Lael Sachs, who has the ability to telepathically send vivid thoughts and visions into the minds of others. There's also Isaac, Doro's own son, who can telepathically lift objects and move them with his mind. After moving to America, Anyanwu settles down with Isaac and starts a family. They settled in this area for many, many years. And there's a sort of later time skip ahead in the book of about 50 years. It's in 1741 that there's a kind of split between Anyanwu and Doro that I don't want to go into too much, but just without giving too much away, this series is several books long. So the exact saga of Anyanwu and Doro isn't really settled once and for all in this one particular book. It continues on throughout the generations, through many centuries and even millennia into the future. The name of the book, Wildseed, comes from this idea that this is a name that Doro gives to Anyanwu because unlike many other people who are in Doro's village, Anyanwu doesn't meekly go along with Doro's plans for the future. I sort of refers to as wild seed in this way, wild meaning she's wild and uncontrollable, and seed kind of like the idea of future, like planting a seed for the future of humanity. This will play a much bigger role later on in the future books in the series that I don't exactly know about, but just needless to say, it's going to continue on for much longer. And this kind of two-sided relationship between the two different ideas of what's right and wrong, power versus like caring, like patriarchal versus matriarchal kind of authority, different ways of seeing how humanity can develop, the different visions for caring versus killing and things like that. It definitely explores these kinds of ideas throughout this science fictional scenario across different generations. If you like sci-fi with lots of interpersonal relationships and tensions, or think the idea of a historical-based narrative with sci-fi elements sounds cool, or interested in stories with lots of social and political relevance, then you may also like Wildseed by Octavia Butler.
Wonderful, Mark. Thank you so much. Octavia Butler is an author who has been on my to-be-read list for a very long time, and I actually have not ever read one of her books, but she is definitely a powerhouse in the science fiction genre. So if you love science fiction, if you love fantasy, as Mark said, all those other wonderful themes that are in her books, I highly recommend checking out Wildseed, as Mark recommended, and any of her other books. Wonderful. All right. Well, our next book friend that is going to tell us about their book is Fiona today. Fiona, what superhero magic book did you bring for us today?
I actually found a delightful YA that I enjoyed very much, and I'm quite glad because I am exhausted with superheroes. People say like, "Oh, did you watch the superhero thing or whatever?" And I'm just like, brain off. So I was dreading this a little bit, and I'm so happy because I really, really found a great book that is also a series that I'm going to continue to read. What I read was Faith Taking Flight by Julie Murphy. And many of you know that I am a huge Julie Murphy fan. And this book continues to assert that she can do no wrong. Just everything she does is like delightful, and wherever she's taking it, it maintains her signature themes and delightful, understated narrative and character building that is just like so delightful. So Faith is actually a character from an existing superhero comic called Harbinger, which is published by Valiant Comics. As far as I know, there are no other book tie-ins like to other characters or anything, so I'm not sure how it came about. Maybe it was just somebody that the author was excited to write about. And that was kind of cool because I don't know Valiant Comics. I'd never heard of Harbinger, but don't let that scare you away from the book. You do not need any of that information. But it did kind of put me in the door of like, oh, maybe I'll go check this out. Maybe I'll go find out what this is about. So Faith is a regular small town high school student, and she is a big nerd. She is very invested in fandom, especially for the show The Grove, which has been ongoing for decades. Even when her parents were younger, they were watching it, and it's sort of like, oh, what's that Canadian high school? Yeah, with Drake. It's like Degrassi meets superheroes, is what the idea of this like fictional show. And she's obsessed with it. She runs this blog about the show and all these like predictions. And she has a lot of like online fame from that blog that she runs. And it's really important to her because, like I said, her parents were also fans. And her parents, she lost them both in a car accident. Kind of a little bit of a like classic superhero experience, it seems. So the superhero part comes in, not just from the show, but when Faith is recruited through this online massive multiplayer RPG to like meet this group at the mall. When she gets there, it's just one guy. It's just one older guy. Very creepy. And I was a little bit like, oh, where's this going? It's sinister, but not in the Degrassi way. He actually is like, Faith, I think you're pretty special, like maybe really special. And she's like, oh my gosh, all my nerdy dreams are coming true. I'm a special person. And he's like, I think you might be a Psyot. So Psyot is the word they use for superheroes. And he takes her to this underground facility called the Harbinger facility. Yeah. And she's sort of like, I shouldn't do this, but I might be special. And they tell her grandma that she's going to this journalism camp. And while she is there, she pretty much gets like thrown in a cell, and it's quite clear that she's going to be an experiment. And then they let her know that they're going to try to activate this Psyot DNA, and she might become a superhero or she might die. Doesn't really matter now because she doesn't have a choice in the matter. It's all being forced on her. So she does get some superhero powers from this, and she escapes the facility. And she goes back to her everyday teenager life. And this is kind of what I really love about this. It's so understated. Like, it's very much just a delightful small town fat kid, Julie Murphy YA. And just a note on fat politics, because it's going to come up here a lot. This is Julie Murphy's thing, and I love her for it. She writes amazing characters, and they are fat. And for those of you who are not on board with the fat politics, it's just this idea that a person, or in this case, a character, can be fat, and they can also be treated with respect, and they can also have an entire whole personality. And as people and as readers in this case, we can respect that. It shouldn't be revolutionary, but from like a publishing standpoint, we did not get to see that a lot in characters. And Julie Murphy pushes this, and I love her for it so much. And I think that's why this is not just a fun superhero book, but an awesome superhero book, because it's this fun, everyday high school student. But when do you get to see a fat superhero? When do you get to be strong and special as well as being fat? So that's definitely something, like, I think you can read it and ignore all of that stuff, but it also might bring readers who want to see that representation. So we are there. She's got the power. She goes back to her regular life, but she's got the secret. And she's also got this trauma, but she's like this delightful, happy kid who wants to do good, who loves animals, who thinks she might want to be a vet, who has best friends who have like sort of everyday problems. And wow, I've talked a lot, but I still haven't like told you all the things that I love about it of like, she's got these two great friends who are having their own problems. Then this like show that she loves, The Grove, relocates to her hometown. She has this like romance with the woman who is the star of the show that she totally loves. And will also kind of have like a little bit of a love triangle because she also has an interest in one of the guys that she works at the paper with. And there is a corn maze. There are missing animals. When you're like, okay, we want to have like a little bit of a mystery, but it can't be too scary. So we're going to use these sort of like the animals are missing, like sort of thing. And she kind of sleuths a little bit, but she acknowledges that she's not a really great sleuth. So all of this is happening while we're wondering, like, what about the superpower, Faith? Tell us more about the superpower. And every once in a while, she's like, I'm going to fly, but just a little bit so that nobody sees. And we're kind of waiting for that shoe to drop. And it does at the end. It's very much going towards a X-Men vibe of like these handful of misfits who are probably going to come together. But I loved how understated it was. I loved that we didn't jump into that. We got to know Faith so well, and she is honestly just like such a delightful character. I'm going to pick up the next one because I want to read more about Faith. I don't really care so much about this other like harbinger thing that is going on. Yeah, it's all about her for me. So if you love Julie Murphy, say don't be afraid by the fact that it's about superheroes. If you're into superheroes and it's more like the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl is like a little bit more where you're at with the like sort of fun stuff, it very much has that lighter tone. Well, there's still some serious stuff going on. And it really won me over because it has my permission to go into a whole series thing where I'm going to get invested, despite the superhero exhaustion that I was feeling before this book. So that is Faith, Taking Flight. And one more note, which is that the audiobook is really great. It's a single narrative and the voice actor gets the character like down pat. I think that's part of what made her so lovable for me.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Fiona. That sounds like just a really fun is the word that comes to mind. Thank you for talking about that book. I think I'm going to definitely add that one to my to be read list. So that's wonderful. And I can understand the superhero exhaustion. I think that at all avenues we are being thrown superheroes into our face in TV and movies and books and video games and in everything. I think superheroes are there. So I can understand that. Wanting to distance ourselves a little bit. Okay, so I am actually going to talk about my book next, which is not so much superheroes as, not surprisingly, focuses more on magic. I know, it's a shocker. It is a big, big shocker. So the book that I'm going to be talking about is called Her Majesty's Royal Coven. It's by Juno Dawson. Juno Dawson is a British author, and she's most commonly known for one of her more popular titles is This Book is Gay, which is one of the most banned books in the last few years, which is often means it's going to be a good read. I think that not always, but I think that often means that we should go out and try and read it. I haven't read that one, but after reading this book, I think I will search out more of Juno Dawson's books. Juno Dawson came out as a transgender woman in 2015. And so many of her books have themes of LGBTQ plus characters and transgender characters in them. And Her Majesty's Royal Coven does as well. So Her Majesty's Royal Coven revolves around 5 friends, and we start our story when they are in their adolescence, and it takes place in the 90s. One reason why I connected with them, I think, is because they were growing up at the same time that I was. And so it takes place in the 90s, and they always talked about which Spice Girls they were going to be, and just kind of that big 90s vibe. But there's something different about these 5 girls. They are all part of magical families. And on the night before the summer solstice, they are gathering in their treehouse. They're all a little bit nervous because the next day they are going to pledge their oaths to Her Majesty's Royal Coven. And Her Majesty's Royal Coven is a, for lack of a better term, government agency that was started by Queen Elizabeth I. And it is designed for witches to work for the government on behalf of the government, to put their life to good use and be a good, proper citizen using their magic to protect the people of Britain. So it's a top secret agency, of course, as it has to be, because magic is not known throughout the whole world. But these 5 girls are finally going to be able to join this agency. We have Helena, who is very, very old lines of magic in her family. Elle, who is friends with all of these girls, has been for years, doesn't know she quite fits in. Leonie knows that she definitely doesn't fit in. She's mixed race. She's a lesbian. She does not connect with these women and these girls on any level that she finds. She is always told that she has to be Scary Spice because of her mixed race background, and she is not happy about that. And then we have twins. We have Niam and Sierra, the Irish twins. So we see these girls right before they're about to pledge their lives and learn about their magic. We then jump forward 25 years, and a lot has happened in that 25 years. And the group has kind of split up. There was a civil war a few years before where a warlock decided that because they have magical powers, why are they in the shadows? Why are they the ones who are hiding when they can control anyone in the world who does not? So they decide that that's what they're going to do. Obviously, one side of the faction does not agree with that. And so it breaks out into civil war. There is much tragedy. Many of our main protagonists lose spouses, lose friends, lose family in this war. And we are now in the aftermath of this. Warlocks are not as trusted as they used to be, even though it wasn't all warlocks, it was just one. But they're still not trusted as usual. Helena has now become the head of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, the youngest ever head of the Royal Coven. Leonie has branched off. She has decided that she no longer wants to be a part, and she has started her own coven called Diaspora, which tries to be more inclusive and more diverse. Niam has decided that she also does not want to be part of the coven. She's a vet and she loves her work with animals. She still uses her gift to help and ease deaths of animals at the end of their life. Elle has decided that she just wants to be a housewife. She is happy in her middle-class life, staying away from magic and the coven. And lastly, Sierra. Sierra was the one of them that decided to join in the Civil War on the opposite side. And in the aftermath of the Civil War, we learn as we read through this book, there was something that happened, and Sierra is unresponsive in a coma and has been since the end of this Civil War. Now, Her Majesty's Royal Coven has seers at their hands that they can use that are going to predict all these big events that are going to happen. And one of these big events is the rise of something called the Sullied Child. And the Sullied Child is somebody who, yes, it's the word choice is very triggering, I think, for some people. It kind of evokes not a good image. But the Sullied Child is somebody who is going to come and destroy Her Majesty's Royal Coven and destroy the world. And the Sullied Child is going to be a warlock, so it's going to be a male witch. And the seers have started to see images of this child more often. And so one day they find a young warlock up in Scotland who has completely destroyed his school. They take him into custody. He is put into a jail cell, and they think that they have found the Sullied Child. No matter what they do, he will not stop destroying things. So Helena, at her wit's end, brings in Niam, who is called an adept, which means that she has multiple different powers. And she thinks that maybe Niam will be able to get through to this teen and at least get him to stop destroying everything in his path. So when Niam comes in, she tries to read his mind to see kind of what's going on in there. And she comes across a block. She comes across a block, but realizes that being in a cell is not going to help him in any way. And so she decides that she's going to take him into her house and teach him and try and get through to him that way. So with Helena's kind of approval, she decides to take this young warlock, Theo, into her house and try to learn a bit more about him to try and figure out if he is in fact this child that everyone is talking about. But when she brings him home, she starts to learn a little bit more. She starts to get a little bit more information. He starts to loosen up a little bit more. And she learns that the one major thing that is blocking the use of magic and making all of this destruction is the fact that he is not a male, the female. He's a girl. And because she doesn't feel like she can truly be herself, she has this block in her magic. And so she's lashing out with all of this destruction because she's not being true to herself. Niam views this without Theo's knowledge, and so she doesn't want to let Theo know that she knows this about her because it's, in her mind, a huge breach of privacy and not something that she should have seen, that she should know. But she does everything that she can to let Theo know that she can be whoever she wants, and Niam is going to be there to support her. So Theo eventually tells Niam that she is transgender, that she has always been a girl, has always felt not right in her body. Niam welcomes her and says, of course, you are a witch. You are part of our coven. You will always be part of our coven. This is not the way that everybody feels in the coven. Helena, more specifically, does not agree with this. She sees Theo as a warlock and always will. And no warlock in her mind should have as much power as Theo does. So Helena decides to try and take Theo away from Niam and give her back to the Warlocks. This spurs on a huge disagreement and eventually a huge war between these factions, between the Covens, and between this group of friends. This book was a bit of a surprise to me. I didn't know too much about it when I first started reading it, and I really, really enjoyed it. It definitely deals with some themes that could be really difficult for some people to read. It could be very triggering. There's a lot of transphobia in this book from one side. There's also a lot of acceptance in this book from the other side of characters. So you do see both sides of that. And so I will just warn people about that. But it is a really great book with really strong characters and really strong connections. It has lots of action. You find yourself loving some characters, absolutely hating some other characters. It ends with a huge twist and a huge cliffhanger. The next book is not scheduled to come out, I think, until this year, hopefully. So I've been waiting for that because I'm not exactly sure how Dawson is going to get her characters out of the mess that she has put them in. So I'm very curious to see how that happens. So that is Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. All right. Well, I think that it is time for our existential question of the day. And the question that I have for all of my book friends is, do you find it easy to suspend your disbelief when you are reading about characters who have superpowers or who have magic? And then a follow-up to that is there anything that you are not able to suspend your disbelief for? Is there anything that you read that you find just too unbelievable and you just cannot read it? Let's start with Virginia on this one. Virginia, what do you think?
I am in for anything. I have no issues with whatever wild thing you throw at me. I will go with it. I think the only thing that I cannot stand is unreasonable, illogical human behavior. So nothing to do with magic, nothing to do with superpowers. I'm totally okay with that. But when it is people behaving in a weird, just ways that just doesn't make sense to me, that's when I have a problem with it. So
that's fair. I can understand that. That doesn't surprise me. I figured you would be someone who would be similar to me and could read pretty much anything on the magic and superhero side of things. I will say for myself that I struggle. There's a theme mainly in YA fantasy I find lately that follows characters that are angels, which I find a bit odd. And that is one thing that I have struggled to fully kind of get behind is angel characters and giving like personalities, and I don't know. It just seems like a very strange thing. And then sometimes I struggle to read about the Fae as well, which is a theme that has been in fantasy for a very long time. It just sometimes gets a bit too over the top. Corrine, what about you?
Oh, I have opinions. So many. Strangely enough, I tend to put magic and superpowers in different categories. I tend to think of them as two different genres. I don't mind magic if there's like a magic system to go along with it. If there's like a reason for the magic, that's fine. Superpowers, I think, are stupid. I don't like them. I don't like them. I don't like superhero movies. The words that I say probably the most often is nobody cares about Ant-Man. So yeah, can I suspend my disbelief? Like if I have to, but I don't feel like I should. The one that I hate the most is superstrength. I think it's just the worst. It's just I'm sorry. I thought the Incredibles movie is overrated. I'm just going to tap myself out right now.
Bold claims from Corrine. Bold claims. We might just see if we get any angry messages about the Incredibles with that one. That's okay. All right. What about you, Mark? Do you suspend your disbelief easily?
Well, I think there just has to be some sort of explanation or structure to why things happen. So as long as there's like a convincing or clear reason why there's this sort of like structure to things within this universe, then typically I can kind of go with it. The only time I really get an issue is that they make someone that's like way stronger, way more powerful than the other people. Like there's this one like exceptional person. Like it just feels doesn't feel interesting at that point because there's just one person who can do everything, or they can just like win any fight immediately and things like that. It's like that's just the biggest issue for me, I think. Like you have to have like sort of even, like somewhat even at least, like, or have like one side, if one side's way stronger than the other, or like one side always wins, there's like just doesn't really feel very interesting at that point, I think.
That's fair. That's fair. I can understand that. All right, Fiona, what about you?
I often really struggle to suspend disbelief, and I think it's a big block in my reading. If I wasn't so judgmental, I think I could enjoy things more, and that's why I do love like an author who can lull me into like something that's really out there and just writes in a self-aware way, and a way that might use like something like a superpower as a literary device, like either to explore character or to explore society or whatever. Like I like that, like I'm making a choice that really helps me a lot. But I do love like when somebody can convince me something crazy and then I can just have fun. Like that's such a nice thing to just be able to be like, oh, like I don't have to judge this, I just can go with it. Yeah. And for me, other things that I can't get on board are just like things that socially don't make sense. And I think I've mentioned before, like sometimes wish fulfillment for me is a big, like just a big no, because I need things to be grounded. And like, so sometimes if it's not justified, even if it's like a fantasy world where they're creating a new society, I need things to be justified without them being over explained, which is like really hard. That's a lot to ask.
That makes sense. No, I get that. Wishes are weird. Wishes are very strange. All right. Well, thank you to all of my book friends for weighing in on our question today. All right, Kareen, what superpower book did you bring for us?
Well. So this was a topic that I is no surprise, considering my previous comments, had a really hard time finding a book. And usually when I have a hard time finding a book to fit the brief, it ends up being about math. I don't know why. I don't know how. But no matter what the topic is and I don't like it, it ends up having to be about math. And honestly, my biggest critique of this book, on top of a number of other things, is could have used more math, which is not a statement that I, of all people, thought I would be saying. But here we are. So our main character is Kaz, something cool. It's definitely pronounced in a cool way that I'm not really wrapping my tongue around, who is described as the side cover, which I didn't read, which I really should have, as Love Trinity in the Matrix, meet Kaz Russell. Oof. But anyways, she's a mathlete, but not the mathlete like you're thinking. She is athletic and can punch people and do all the kicky things, but she's also good at math. Really good at math, like scary good at math. If someone has a gun trained on her, then she can calculate the, trajectories and velocity and get all the angles so that she knows exactly when to kind of like dodge out of the way of the bullet. She does all of the Matrix style things that you would expect because her math is just that good. So good is her math that no window stands in her way, and she can leap out of a 2-story building and land perfectly because she can math it. This is not going to be good. All right, so she has been hired by Donna Polk to track down her sister, Courtney, who accidentally became a drug smuggler and then accidentally betrayed the cartels and then accidentally got herself kidnapped by the cartels and shipped off to Colombia, as you do. So Donna, who is an office worker, hires Kaz, Trinity from the Matrix, to rescue her sister because she's heard she's really good at it. And like, so she is. When you're this good at math, nothing can stand in your way. Not even an awkward encounter with your, I'm going to go with friend, Rio, who is an unstoppable psychopath who's working as an undercover something for the cartels. And when you're caught, he has to kind of like punch you, but it's fine because like you can math exactly when to turn your face away and he'll just split your lip. And it's fine. It's fine. The math takes care of it. So, of course, she manages to kill all the bad guys quite easily using the power of addition and subtraction, and takes Courtney back to LA, where Courtney tearfully hires Kaz to kind of like get her life back together. Courtney seems to recognize, oh, you're really good at math and you're really good at figuring things out. So just like math my life back to normal. And reluctantly, because she has apparently nothing else to do, she agrees. But But as she's trying to gather the pieces of this woman's life together, that's when everything falls apart. So when she goes to Courtney's apartment to get her money that she's hidden under the floorboards, we just don't do floorboards anymore like we used to. It's a real shame. It's a real shame. She finds that there are these like shadowy agents dressed all in black that have staked out her house. When she goes to get some intel from her favorite hacker and his perky little 12-year-old daughter, they're immediately firebombed and die in horrible inferno. Oops. She also gets attacked by a motorcycle gang, but is kind of saved, but not saved because she's too cool to be saved, by author Trusting. And if you think that sounds like trusting, you would be correct. He is a PI who has been hired by a woman whose husband committed suicide, but she doesn't think it was suicide. She thinks that he was tricked into it or that it was murder. And as he has been investigating this case, he has kind of recognized some odd coincidences or strange occurrences that are happening that he ties to this deeply shadowy organization called Pithica, which undeniably is a really cool name for like a bag company. Like, oh, did you get the new Pithica release bag? Yes. Oh, okay. But anyways, it's a shadowy organization, and it seems to be able to convince people to do things that they wouldn't normally do, i.e. write grammatical errors in their suicide notes, quit their jobs, or go to Colombia and rescue a supposed drug runner. Da, da, da. So who is manipulating who and why? Is Kaz/Cass the only person with magical powers? And as her and her best friend Rio, the unstoppable psychopath, and Arthur are drawn further into the conspiracy, Kaz/Cass discovers that it might have something to do with her own shadowy and forbidden past that she doesn't remember, because of course she doesn't. So it could have used more math. Yeah, for someone who has like math as a superpower, I would have expected a more mathematical based approach to anything. It's really tough because I think sometimes when you try to make like a really hardcore fighty hero, you sometimes forget to make them like a character. And they are just like a set of skills. And especially because, you know, they're trying to be like really like grimdark about it. They don't care about anyone. And then you don't care about them, which is a problem. And then I think it's something that Mark actually alluded to, is that if someone has all the powers in the world and they're like unstoppable and unbeatable, then it makes it really uninteresting, because you also have to have a villain who's equally as unstoppable and unbeatable and unhittable. It's kind of like in the Fast and the Furious movies, how you have Vin Diesel and you have The Rock, and contractually Vin Diesel is never allowed to lose a fight. So allegedly in his contract, he's not allowed to lose any fights. So whenever there's like a battle or there's like two people going against each other, no one can win and no one can lose. Everyone just kind of like walks away with a like, next time. So in that way, that is my problem with the superhero genre, is that no one can win, no one can lose. And so it ultimately feels pointless. Like none of you, there's not going to be a resolution to this that's satisfying until the very end, where you're going to triumph over some way. And if you're going to triumph, it has to be very interesting of how you do that. Like, how do you beat someone who's, for all intents and purposes, unbeatable? Their powers make them an unstoppable force. And so I feel like that's a real problem of this genre, that, you know, a genre that is full of tropes, that in order to subvert it, you have to be so clever and try something so new. And I don't necessarily think that this book achieves that. It is the first book, and that there's a sequel, so maybe she does. But at the end, I was left kind of like, oh, well, nothing has changed. And the other thing I don't love about the genre is the body count, where there's just like indiscriminate killing of innocents all the time. Oh, I showed up and I killed like 17 dudes, and you're like, oh, well, they were people too. Like, we could shed a tear for the loss of human life. Like, some of them, one of our main characters that we're, I think, supposed to care about kills horribly murders an entire office of people in visceral detail. And we're just supposed to be like, well, that's the price we pay for powers or something. And that is for me like a real turnoff as a reader. That's why I don't like zombie movies, is that it makes human life so cheap when you do that. When you're killing off henchmen or you're killing off bad guys, there's no meaning to any of it. And it just kind of, it cheapens what a human life is. And this has turned into my mini rant against superhero movies. So I'm going to wrap it up by saying, if you really enjoyed Trinity and the Matrix movies, you will probably enjoy Zero Sum Game by S.L. Huang.
I feel like this is how we got 10 Fast and the Furious movies, because nobody ever wins. And this coming from someone who has only watched ever one Fast and the Furious movies, so I can't speak too much about it. But
are you kidding? They're cinematic masterpieces. 1 through 7 are pretty much the greatest movies ever made.
Is the 10th one called Fasten Your Seatbelts? Like Fasten Your Seatbelts?
It is not.
Fasten. Oh, they missed out. Come on. All right. Well, thank you, Corinne. Thank you for that very honest math-based review of that book. Who knew? Who knew that math, there could be too much math and also not enough math? Corinne knew. Corinne knew. All right. For our final book talk today, we have Virginia. What superhero magic-based book did you bring for us?
I didn't realize there's going to be so much hatred for everything here. I don't care for superhero movies either, but I don't hate them, I don't think, the way it's been expressed today. So it's eye-opening for me today. Anyway, I think one of the things that I think we can all agree that we don't hate is that there are amazing authors out there, and many of them have a bit more clout with us than others. If they like a book, we often say, oh, we're going to read it, we'll put it on our TBR because they like it and because we respect them. And so when it comes to my favorite genres, when it comes to books that really center on the experience of the LGBTQ community, I always turn to Charlie Jane Anders. She's a big advocate for books and authors, and if she recommends it, I know it's going to be good. And so this is a book that I found because she gave 5 stars on Goodreads, and it is Dreadnaught by April Daniels. So this is a young adult series. It is book 1 of the Nemesis series, and book 2, Sovereign, is also out. So you can find those 2 in a library near you. So Dreadnaught is the superhero origin story of Danny Tosa, and she got her superpowers at the shopping mall. She was there one day to go grab some nail polish, and once she grabbed what she wanted, she immediately went out to the parking lot behind the mall, kicked off her shoes, and started painting her toes. Because painting her nails is something that really helps her calm down. It helps her center herself. Whenever she feels she's not quite herself, whenever she doesn't feel right, that's what she does to make her feel better. So she was happily painting her toes away when a giant thing fell from the sky and landed not too far from Danny. And when the dust settles, she realizes it is not a thing. It is Dreadnaught, one of the most powerful superheroes in her city. And if you hate super strength, Corinne, then you will hate Dreadnaught because that's what he has, among other things. Dreadnaught is not looking so powerful right now because not only is he severely injured from whatever that slams him to the ground, but he also has a giant hole in his chest. It's not looking good. And if there's something that can do that to Dreadnaught, the nearly invincible superhero, then Danny should really run far, far away. But she couldn't because there's a guy dying right in front of her. She can't just leave him there. So she decides to sort of drag him to a bit more of a shelter, at least just so that he's not so out in the open. And she tries to give him some water because that's kind of what you do when you see somebody injured, even though it's not going to help him at all. But Dreadnaught started saying to her about something about utopia. Somehow she's got this new weapon. And Danny has never heard of utopia, but she assumes that it must be whoever that did this to Dreadnaught. And then Dreadnaught turned to Danny and said, "You are so young. I am so sorry to do this to you, but I'm dying, as you can see, and I can't let my powers die with me. So here, I'm going to give you my power. Sorry, kid. I know this is a lot." And with that, Dreadnaught reaches into his chest and takes out this white ball of light, and it holds it out for Danny, and she touches it, and then there's light everywhere, and there's pain and everything feels twisted. The universe feels like it's unraveling. And when everything stops, everything hurts. And she is lying on the ground with Dreadnaught now dead. She starts yelling his name to try to wake him up. But what comes out of her surprised and shocked her because it was a girl's voice. And she looked down and she said, oh my gosh, my body has changed. I have now changed into a girl. And all her life, that's what Dani has always wished for. She always knows that she is not a boy. She's born into the wrong body. She is a girl. And now the world will also know. But what will the world think of it? This is a book about Dani, of course, figuring out the powers that she has acquired, along with a newish superhero, Calamity, who dresses as a cowgirl that Dani met. And later find out that, Calamity also goes to her school. And a little bit different from Fiona's book, there's definitely a lot of superhero stuff in here. If you like the superhero things, you're going to have a very satisfying read. Dani's trying to test out her powers. She can fly. She has superhuman strength, like I mentioned. But she also has this ability to perceive reality in a different way, which makes it pretty cool. So, I'll let you discover that. And April Daniels did a really good job in describing those scenes. And sometimes when we think about superheroes, we think about like a graphic novel or like maybe on screen that you can see those action, but she did it just with words and you can picture the scenes perfectly. So she did a really good job in that. There's also a little reference and calling out Batman for his superpower of being very rich. That's pretty much all he got. So that was kind of funny. And then, Dani, of course, also has to learn what it means to be a superhero. Like, what kind of superhero do I want to be in the world where she's supposed to be Dreadnaught and Dreadnaught belongs to the Legion? And, when the Legion discovers that Dani has Dreadnaught's powers, they're trying to tell her like, okay, well, you can't go caping yet. That's what they called it because you're too young. And they have bad experience with superheroes being too young and not being able to adjust to their power. So they're trying to be careful, but Dani, of course, has to figure out a different way of doing things. What is right for her might be different from what other people think. But wrestling with her superpowers, that is definitely not Dani's biggest challenge because this is also a coming out story for Dani. And like Sadie's book, there is a lot of transphobia and misgendering and homophobia that Dani has to deal with when she came out to the world. And the world is not really accepting her. And it's not really dealing with Utopia or other supervillains that is the hardest for her. Her family, for example, her dad especially, thinks that this is just a temporary thing. It could be fixed. They just have to find the right doctors. And they wanted the son that they had. And even if Dani keep telling them that, like, I was never your son, I have always been your daughter. Like, they would not listen. She also lost her best friend because of that. When she came out, again, people won't accept her. Even the superheroes, even the Legion, who is supposed to be the good guy, so to speak, she's getting some very turfy treatment from some of them. And because no one will call them out, she also feels like, well, do I want to stay with you, the Legion? Because you won't even stand up for me. So she feels like she can't really trust them either. So Dani has to learn on her own how to deal with all the changes and all the power that she has. And it made her doubt herself even more because, like, already she's kind of thinking, well, it's not like Dreadnaught picked me for my qualities or for my potential. I just happen to be there. And so how can I talk about defending the city? How can I protect people if I can't even stand up to my dad? So she feels like very much like she's not worthy of the power. But Dani will soon come to realize that being true to yourself, fighting for who you are is not selfish. That's what everybody wants to tell her, but she'll have to learn that that is not the case. And as Fiona said, the world needs superheroes of all kinds and superhero stories of all kinds. And April Daniels has given us a transgender superhero to cheer for. And a superhero, I think, not just having those superpowers that we talk about, but also there are many, many facets to her. And she's not feeling the super strength that she has because of all these other challenges that she has. So look for Dani in Dreadnaught and also the sequel. The first book definitely has a lot of potential for a sequel. So can't wait to see what Dani does next. So this is Dreadnaught by April Daniels.
Wonderful. Thank you, Virginia. That is another one I think that I'm going to put on my TBR list. So that's wonderful. I got a couple new books today. So thank you so much to all of my book friends for bringing your recommendations or not recommendations to today's episode. Hey, if you like math, a little bit, but not too much, that might be the one for you. You never know. All right. Well, thank you so much to all of our listeners today. Once again, we are Keep It Fictional from the Port Moody Public Library, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please tell a fellow book lover about it. You can find a list of all the books we discussed in our show notes. Join us next week for another fun book chat. Until then, keep it fictional.